Hey folks, it's Arlyeon with another crit hit review. There's going to be a lot of flashing and pulsing colors, so if you suffer from epilepsy, consider this a general warning for your own well-being. With that out of the way, on this week's episode we'll be tackling Entity Medialab's Hyperspace Invaders II Pixel Edition. Goddamn is that a mouthful. While similar to another title we recently covered in that it's inspired by Space Invaders, it strays more from the mellow shoot-'em-up aspects in favor of a psychedelic bullet hell experience. But is Hyperspace a slick retro reimagining, or is it an unwanted invader in your gaming library? So, to begin, let's address what you can actually expect from Hyperspace Invaders. First off, it's a top-down shooter but in the style of a bullet hell, so you can expect to be faced with not only walls of enemies, but an outright onslaught of projectiles, all of which can kill you in one hit. That said, you're not helpless, as you're blessed with a small hitbox, a weapon which builds in power as you murder enemies, and a reserve of extra lives which you can build up along with your score, provided you don't die quickly. Likewise, the controls to the game are simple and responsive, which helps with all things survival related, especially since they work well on both keyboard and controller, though I prefer the latter since I generally prefer the controller. Essentially, you're able to devote almost all of your attention to evasive maneuvers due to the fact that firing is automated, meaning that the directional controls will be your main priority. So really, the only other input you're actually going to need to worry about is the laser weapon, which drains power from your main weapon in exchange for firing off a concentrated beam which can outright destroy most oncoming projectiles or ships, which is likely going to see a lot of use over the course of Void Invaders 12 stages, as almost every one plays out as a survival match of sorts, tasking you to stay alive for the duration of each level's theme song, and maybe get a high score while you're at it. Each stage possesses its own particular flavor of challenges, which can come in the form of waves of rainbow energy, which drain your weapon's power, looming walls which obstruct your shots and enable enemy forces to just box you in, visual hijinks, which I'm not exactly a huge fan of, and even some somewhat imposing mini-boss-esque enemies which can fire a wide variety of shot types and patterns at you. And yes, there are stages where all of the above are happening, sometimes for a grueling amount of time, given that the longest of these stage types lasts 9 minutes and 34 seconds. And given that the game isn't so kind as to provide any form of checkpoints during its stages, it's likely for this reason that instead it offers the full gamut of its stages up front, allowing you to challenge any stage from the get-go. And honestly, I'm quite grateful that it allowed me to sample all of what it had to offer, especially since that's how I discovered that one of the stages later on is actually a literal homage to the original Space Invaders game, foregoing the normal timed aspect in favor of, I figured it'd probably have come out to around 50 rounds of surviving oncoming invaders slowly creeping down the screen towards me. Either way, it was a definitely interesting change of pace from the rest of the game. And yes, you are totally limited to just being able to move on a horizontal plane, because it is retro as fuck. So, moving on to the stories section of this review, no, nothing here really. So alright, moving on. And here we are, onwards to the graphics, and where some mixed feelings lie, honestly. Now, for the most part, Hyperspace Invaders manages to do its graphics well. They carry a distinct Space Invaders vibe to them, albeit a bit flashier, sometimes to a distracting level. That said, they managed to make the enemies and obstacles distinct enough by color and pattern that I was generally able to recognize them even in the midst of the pandemonium, laser bursts, and bullet storms that more or less occupies each of the game's stages. On the other hand, the game does have a few failings for me graphically that even its retro charm couldn't undo, such as the way that its backgrounds and graphical hijinks could actually mask ships and bullets at times, and given that you die in one hit, the fact that it can cause ships and bullets to be obscured through its shenanigans and lead to unfair deaths is fairly cheesy. Whilst this particular issue is less common, what I found a lot harder to ignore was the fact that its focus on flashing and pulsing lights led to my eyes outright hurting after a bit of prolonged play. It wasn't uncommon for me to walk away from doing a few stages with a severe headache. So, with that said, now we come to Hyperspace Invaders audio. And well, the soundtrack was a treat for me, which makes sense given that each of the game's stages are actually specifically tailored to last the length of a song, which serves as its theme. For the most part, I found this to be pretty catchy and fun since the action tended to mirror what was going on with the music. And I say for the most part because the second stage's theme was pretty damn samey for me. Moreover, whilst the overall soundtrack is good, the actual sounds of the bullets firing could get a bit grating over time since there's a continuous stream of them coming and going. Though I totally appreciate the sound of the super laser going off. It was always satisfying when that happened. So, essentially with all this said, this game grew on me. As a bullet hell, it was fairly accessible and enjoyable, and for the simple arcade-esque experience it has to offer, it doesn't empty your wallet. I know I'm generally not someone who plays a lot of shoot-em-ups or bullet hells, but honestly, the connection between its altogether solid soundtrack and gameplay was a touch that was just more than welcome, and I appreciated the fact that it had that retro homage to its source material stuck in the game as one of its later stages. Again, as like a bullet hell, not my personal cup of tea, but I really don't mind it for the most part. The major part of my hyperspace experience that I found grating, really, was just the aspect I couldn't avoid, and that was the graphics, like I mentioned earlier. Not only was I occasionally fighting against the game's graphics, but I found myself being unable to play for any prolonged period of time comfortably, in part due to the deluge of just flashing colors and pulsing lights. In essence, whilst to some degree I feel that the game would be a hit by virtue of its gameplay alone, as well as just the well-crafted, bite-sized, and altogether accessible and affordable bullet hell experience, its graphics may interfere with the experience for some people, or prohibit others who have epilepsy, or just make prolonged ventures into it an unpleasant experience if you are sensitive to light, which knocks it down to a fumble for me. It's not something that I'd recommend to everyone, but for those who are actually heavily into bullet hells, for its cost it might be worth a spin.